Okay, I think I've given enough time. We'll start. So, firstly, hello, welcome back, everyone. I know it's been a long time. We met almost like a week. There was a vacation in between, but cool. So, the basic plan for today's class is finishing the chapter we are dealing with right now, which is the Central Islamic lands, right? So, as soon as we finish this chapter right now, we'll also be having another class in the evening, usually at our timings, which is at 6 p.m., right? Where we'll be having a quiz on this chapter, right? I know most of y'all are waiting for the quiz for this chapter, and finally it's here. We're going to have it today evening, so just giving a heads up before. But for now, in today's class, we'll be talking about the concluding parts of the Central Islamic lands, right? So that's the basic plan for today. Um, Okay, a couple of you are already here. Hello, guys. Good morning. I'll just give it a couple of minutes for other people to join as well. But in the meanwhile, I'll do the introductory part, right? So, as most of you all know, my name is Nikitha, and I'm the history educator here at Unacademy Scholars Channel, and I take classes for both standard 11th and 12th, right? So, a little bit about the Telegram Scholars channel. So, the link for that is in the description below of this video. I highly urge you all to go join it because it's really helpful, especially when there are any updates or postponing of classes which are happening on the YouTube channel per se. So, that will be helpful. Go join it ASAP and uh, an update on the Unacademy's combat scholarship test again. These are scholarships worth 1 crore, so that's like a huge stake. And then the test format is as such that there are 60 minutes given to you to answer 30 questions, right? The questions are available both in Hindi and English, and these are free live tests on Android. So these happen every week, right? This week it's happening on 17th of October, which is usually at 1 p.m. for 11th standard students. Again, the link for this is in the description below. Go check it out and enroll yourselves because it's really helpful during the times of examinations. And quickly moving on to Unacademy's plus and iconic benefits. So when it comes to plus, there are a number of them. Firstly, you can sit at your own houses and listen to some of the classes taught by top educators of India, and all of them are available on one single platform. There's unlimited access to all the courses. Alongside, there are regular doubt clearing sessions, answer writing sessions, and there's practice test and live test series as well. And there's exhaustive coverage of syllabus, right? So every educator here at Unacademy Plus, they make sure that they are covering every topic or theme mentioned as a part of the CBSE syllabus. And lastly, there's mentorship given to you, there's guidance given to you, along with access to study materials which are in the form of PDF basically, again, which are highly helpful during the times of revisions, right? That will make your job much easier. And regarding the pricing for Plus, there are 6 ranges of subscription per se. Firstly, there's 3 month subscription, then there's 9, 12, 15, 18, and 24-month subscription. The prices are clearly visible on the screen for every duration, right? These ones. Have a look at them and feel free to subscribe to whichever one you want to, right? And a little bit about the iconic. Here the features are even better and greater. Firstly, there's a personal mentorship given to you, like a one-on-one thing. Then there are live doubt solving sessions. Then there are weekly reports. Then there's direct parent connect along with provision for study planners. So again, that's highly helpful. I highly urge you all to go subscribe for any of the 6 durations mentioned here. The prices are clearly corresponding them. So have a look at them and go ahead with whichever one you feel comfortable, right? And lastly, before getting on to the actual content for today, let me just tell you that there is some kind of special content which you can access by downloading the Unacademy's learning app on your mobile phone by using the Google Play Store. and then you have to like log into it with proper credentials and then select your goal, which is 11th standard, right? And then on the menu button on the top left corner, there's an option called special. Click on that and it will ask you for a code. So you can use this code, which is TUM10, right? And then you'll basically have access to the content. And these are very like organized and systematized, so that will help you in terms of your preparation for boards, right? Okay, cool. So that brings us to the end of the pitch, and without any further delay, we'll quickly jump into the topic we have, because we have a lot to cover, like a little extra than we usually do. So I'll quickly move on, but a couple of you are already here. So like, hello Shrestha, like hello everyone else who joined right now. Cool. We'll quickly begin. So like the broader general theme we'll be discussing today is the learning and culture of Islamic lands, right? We have started this in the last class itself, but we'll continue the same topic today, right? That also is like the last topic. Yeah. So cool. So we were talking about how rudimentary the Islamic order was, right? How orthodox it was. But as the Sufis came in, they started challenging the orthodox Islam. That is the last point we've discussed in the last class. So now we'll talk about an alternative vision of God and also the universe in general, right? So who was responsible for developing this alternate way of looking at God? They are Islamic philosophers and also scientists, right? As far as scientists are concerned, for them to believe in anything, there need to be a proper logic or reason, right? So what did scientists do? They actually borrowed all those philosophies and all those logics from the Greek spectrum, right? From Greek knowledge systems. They have borrowed all these reasons and they implemented them to the Islamic world, right? Like the be it in terms of looking at God or looking at universe in general, like be it anything. Scientists claimed that you only have to believe in that once there's a particular logic behind it, right? So this is like a new way that was developing in the Islamic traditions. That's a new challenge, right? Some people might agree to what scientists are saying, some people might like disagree with them and be like, no, religion is about scientists, so we'll only listen to what religion teaches us. So there are like agreeing, disagreeing between people, but nonetheless a different train of thought developed by philosophers and scientists have been developing in the Islamic world, right? So and then what happens is by the 7th century, almost like by the end of 7th century, where the Greek Empire has already fallen by then. Greek Empire was no more there. It was ruined, right? But whatever like traditions or culture or customs of Greek culture were there, they were very much prevalent in the 7th century Byzantine and Sasanian empires, right? Because Byzantine and Sasanian empires, they literally loved Greek culture, right? They adored Greek culture so much that they borrowed so many aspects of Greek culture into their lives, right? So that is why even though Greek empire died, Greek empire was destroyed, Greek culture was still there in the Byzantine and Sasanian empires, especially in the 7th century, right? So that's basically the point. And so in the schools of Alexandria, Syria and Mesopotamia, like these three are the regions over which once upon a time Alexander asserted his dominance, right? Like Alexander ruled over Alexandria, Syria and Mesopotamia. So even after he died, right? Even after the Greek culture was Greek empire was coming to an end, in the schools in these three places, nonetheless, Greek philosophy, mathematics, and medicine were compulsorily taught to students along with their normal subjects, right? So basically the point here is the power of Greek culture, the power of Greek sciences, yeah, Greek mathematics, Greek philosophy, like Greek everything, like whatever was invented in Greek. So all of that had a lot of prominence, right? They have been in circulation for over centuries together. That's the point, right? So yeah, quickly moving on to the next slide. Now we're talking about Umayyads and Abbasids, right? We have talked about these two dynasties slash kingdoms in the initial phases while we were discussing this chapter. But now what happens with Umayyads and Abbasids is they have actually commissioned uh, the translation works. Honestly speaking, translation has become a very, very important activity in the 7th, 8th, 9th centuries, right? Because all of the knowledge systems was in Greek, but people in the Islamic lands could not read Greek. So definitely translation has to take place. And that is why all these kings themselves, all these caliphs themselves, they have funded, they have commissioned all these translators, right? To translate all the Greek works into the local languages, right? For example, Syriac languages, because Syriac was widely spoken in some parts of the Islamic world, right? So they were translated, and this work was mainly done by Christian scholars, right? Because Christian scholars, they already knew Greek because they are the original Greek speakers. And once they came and settled down in the Islamic empire, then obviously they will have the knowledge, or like they will learn the Arabic language, right? So once they came and settled down, once they are well versed in both the languages, Greek and Syriac books were translated into Arabic by the Christian scholars, right? Uh, Tushar, I get your point, but then we're kind of towards the ending of the chapter, right? So once we finish this chapter, then we'll quickly move on to term 2, right? And also, like, we'll be having a quiz today evening on this chapter, right? So I'm hoping that works. Yeah, because in your school, it must have been completed, right? But like for others, is it completed or not? We don't really know. So we have to wait till what others say. I think we can talk about this in today's evening class where we'll be having a quiz, right? So after the quiz, then we can take a poll. Is that fine, Tushar? Your suggestions are definitely acknowledged. I've noted all of them down. But we'll have a talk with other people as well in evening's class. Yeah? Yeah. I kind of know that, Tushar, but like other states as well, we'll discuss with the students and then we'll come to a conclusion. Right? Cool. Yeah, point noted, Tushar. I'll look into that. Thank you. Um, Anyways, where were we? We were talking about the translation works, right? Like translation in itself has become an occupation, right? Because many people, just for their livelihood, they started learning different languages and therefore indulging in the work of translation, right? It has become so prominent, it has become a well organized activity, especially under Al Mamun, right? We've discussed who Al Mamun was in last class. So he actually set up a library, right? It was also an institute of science. So it had like a multi-purpose, right? There was a building complex. One side people thought it as a library. The other side people used it as an institute for science, for some kind of research, right? So this was there in Baghdad, right? Many scholars from around the Islamic world, they used to go to Baghdad in order to visit this thing, right? Either to learn or to carry out some kind of scholarly work, they used to visit Baghdad, right? And Al Mamun was the person who actually supported and constructed this complex, where the translation works used to very heavily happen, right? So that's again the importance of translation. And also like the works of Aristotle, the elements of Euclid and Ptolemy, Almagest. So these are all like great Greek scholars which we haven't studied, but like you all know in general that these are great Greek scholars who were there in like the third, fourth, and even sometimes before Christ centuries, right? So they have written amazing philosophical works, right? Euclid's geometry, Ptolemy's geography, Aristotle wrote so much philosophical and like political thoughts, right? So all of these works, they like Arabic people obviously wanted to read them, but they couldn't. So that is why again these works were also translated into Arabic and other local Islamic languages, right? Like Persian, Turkish, and all. So these works were also translated. Alongside that, whatever was there in India. For example, India was famous for astronomy, mathematics, and medicine, right? So all of these works were also translated into Arabic roughly around the same period, like 7th, 8th, 9th centuries. Translation works were happening, right? So when like all these works, for example, Indian astronomy is there or Indian mathematics is there, right? So it kept traveling around the world because people have been traveling and they have been carrying ideas with them. So whenever these Indian works on astronomy and mathematics reached Europe, European people were so much interested in the Indian work, right? The fact that so many European scholars invested their time in studying about the Indian works on astronomy and mathematics is very great, right? They have researched so much, they have spread the knowledge so much, right? So that again is the importance of Indian works in the European world, especially in the branches of philosophy and science, right? Okay. Any questions, guys? Please ask them in the chat box. I'll quickly answer them. Okay, Manshi is here with us. Hello, Manshi. But anyways, any questions? Please put them down in the chat box. But I'll just quickly keep running through, right? So, yeah, what's happening here, right? Like the one thing which is very significant here is initially it was only the religion or like the religious script which people used to read, right? Like even the Islamic people, they only used to read Quran or Hadith or something related to religion, right? But once the exchange of ideas started happening, they're learning mathematics, they're learning astronomy, astrology, philosophy, science, medicine, right? There are n number of fields that the people are learning, right? So because of that, because of the fact that new subjects are being introduced, obviously it will promote some kind of critical thinking within the people, right? And that is exactly what happened. People started thinking rationally, people started thinking logically, right? Now they are not blindly believing in anything that the religion says. In fact, they started questioning, right? Like why is it like that, how, where, yeah, like all these questions. And obviously Islamic intellectual life started blooming because of the introduction of new subjects, right? So that's basically the point. And quickly moving on, we also see that some of the scholars had a theological bent of mind, right? So we've also seen like what theology is in the last classes. It's like a rational thought, right? So once scholars started having a thought process in that particular way, right? And people whoever had this theological bent were called as Mutazila, right? These were a group of people. The group was called as Mutazila, right? In order to justify whatever they believed, they kind of used logic, yeah, and also reasoning to defend their beliefs, right? And where did this logic and reasoning come from? They actually were borrowed from Greek knowledge systems, right? So again, Greek is playing an important role. So they were using logic and reasoning to defend their Islamic beliefs. This was done by theological scholars. Okay, questions. Uday, unfortunately not. I'm sorry about that. The sessions are going to be only in English, Uday. Okay, Namit is here with us. Hello, Namit. Good morning. Thanks for asking. I'm doing well. I'm hoping you're good too, right? Cool. We'll quickly move on then. We were here, right? Okay. So all these philosophers, they had a particular term in Arabic called as falasifa, right? Again, important, please remember it's falasifa. They are philosophers, right? They again following the same thought process of logic and reason, they came up with different questions, right? Some of the questions were answered by them, some of them were not answered, right? Some were mysteries. Yeah, like wide range of questions regarding everything. Yeah, like be it as simple as, like why are we supposed to like close our eyes while praying, till that is like the minimalist question you can ask, right? That's like the smallest range of question, ranging from that to bigger questions like what is beyond this cosmic order, what is beyond this universe, right? So all these questions were asked by philosophers. Some of them were answered, some of them were not answered, but questioning is important here, right? So that happened by philosophers. And there was a particular person by name called as Ibn Sina. The spelling is here, Ibnsina, right? He was born in 1980 and died in 1037, right? So, okay, like he basically lived in 10th, 11th centuries, but irrespective of that, he was a doctor by profession, right? And later on, he also came to be called as a philosopher. Yeah. So, what do we see here? A mix of philosophy and science, right? So, like his thought process must be totally different. So, he came up with a new ideology that usually Muslims believed in life after death, right? But he told that resurrection of the body on the day of judgment is not possible, which basically means there is no life after death. Yeah. So obviously the religious scholars were not happy with this. Yeah, because it's going against their religion. Right? Somebody is saying something against their religion. So obviously scholars are not happy with what Ibn Sina was telling. Right? But nonetheless some people believed him. Right? Some people having rational thought believed him. And also because he's a doctor, he wrote so much of medical writings, right? They were widely circulated, they were widely read by people. And one important medical text that he wrote was Al Qanun fil Tib, right? Again, a very important term, please remember. So the most influential was Al Qanun fil Tib, right? If you roughly translate it, it's called as the canon of medicine, right? Canon is nothing but like a collection, right? So within this, you almost have 1 million word manuscripts. Just imagine somebody writing million words in their book. That is a lot, right? So these million-word manuscripts, there was so much content, like explicit content, and it almost lists 760 drugs, right? Drugs are like not that drugs, but like medicines, right? 760 type of medicines which were sold by pharmacists of his day. Yeah, he's like, like if you get fever, you're supposed to take this medicine, or if you get something else, you're supposed to take this medicine, right? All of that was detailedly mentioned in his book called as Al Qanun fil Tib, right? Along with that, he also mentions about some of his experiments which he carried out in his hospitals. Yeah, so that's like a huge canon of medicine which gained very, very prominence back in those times, right? Okay. So, okay, quickly moving on as to what that particular book talks about in detail. So, another point is that it also talks about the importance of dietetics, right? So, what is dietetics exactly? Again, if you're not feeling well, one way in which you can cure your disease is by properly eating nutritious food, right? Other than taking medicines, like medicines is one part of it, nutrition is another part, right? So this book talks about dietetics where just by eating proper food you can heal your diseases, right? So that is one of the important points or themes of his book, right? He also talks about how the changing in climate or change in the environment has an effect on the health and contagious nature, on the health of people, right? And how some diseases can be contagious and therefore you need to be careful, right? Like all these scientific basic things which we already know right now, all of them were mentioned as a part of this book, right? And it gained so much importance in Europe, especially that it was used as a textbook in so many schools and colleges, right, for medical students. And the author, obviously, because he had a Islamic name, it was translated into one of the Christian names or like European names called as Avicenna, right? Avicenna. Again, the pronunciation might be a little bit different, but he was called as Avicenna in Europe, and this book was widely used for medical students, right? So, cool. So that's about the book, and the next part of this is generally in the Islamic societies, right? You in the medieval periods, like starting from 7th to almost 15th centuries, if anybody has a fine language and creative imagination, these two aspects are important, right? Language and creative imagination. Let's say I am living in medieval societies and I have great exposure to language and imagination. I would be treated with respect, right? I would be looked at as a dignified person, right? My qualities will be very much appreciated. So that again is important skills or important like qualities one is expected to possess, yeah, and then they'll be appreciated, right? So what did these qualities do, right? Why are they important? So these are very, very important because they would raise a person's communication to the level of adab. So again, I'm talking, right? Like I'm generally talking. Anybody can talk because they have been trained to from their childhood. But once they have this creative imagination and fine language, the way that they are talking will be totally different, right? It will have some kind of cultural and literary refinement that will look or that will sound very elegant, right? So because of that, uh, people were respected, and this form of communication is called as adab, right? So again, a very important term, adab, just remember that, right? And I'm sorry, just give me a second. Okay, so we were talking about adab, right? So what exactly does adab constitute of? Firstly, there's poetry and then there's prose, but whatever it is, the words are very much complicated, right? They have this classical approach to them. Like generally also, if we are talking in normal languages, everyone will understand, right? But if you're taking some William Shakespeare poem or like William Wordsworth poem, it's kind of difficult to understand because there's so many poetic slangs used, right? So that is why it's difficult. In the same manner, like normal conversation happens, but adab is the next level conversation which is not understood by everyone, right? So that's the difference. Okay, so also like whatever poems were being composed in the pre-Islamic origin, they were basically called as ode, right? Odes are very famous even now. Odes are nothing but like they are smaller versions of poems, right? Which usually have either 2 lines or 4 lines, right? And in Persian they are called as kasida, right? So these kinds of ode poems were developed during the Abbasid period, yeah, and the main content of this poem, whatever used to be, was praise. Let's say I am writing a poem and the content of my poem would be praising someone, be it God, be it architecture, be it the king, but the element of praising or like applauding somebody's work is the main content of the odes, right? So that's ode for you. And what happened in the late 8th century is a person by name Abu Nuwas, right? So Abu Nuwas was basically a Persian scholar, right? He was a poet, wrote amazing poetry. What he did is, generally, as far as the Islamic tradition is concerned, there are certain things which you should not talk about. For example, wine, right? Because like alcohol and all, like wine, and also like male love, like love between two male people, or like love in general, right? These are some of the themes which should not be talked in public according to the Islamic traditions, right? But what Abu Nuwas did was he actually challenged the Orthodox Islam, right? He is like, like nobody should tell me what to and what not to talk. I have the right to talk about anything I want to, right? And therefore he starts talking about love, wine, like male love and all of this stuff in his poems, right? And that was like a huge challenge to the Orthodox Islamic tradition. But nonetheless he died in 815, right? He only wrote a couple of them but had a stronger impact, right? So that happened in 815, and by the time almost the Arabs conquered Iran, right? Iran is the Persian land, but Arabs are totally different, right? Don't get confused between Arabs and Iranians, guys. So Arabs speak Arabic language, Iranians speak Persian language, right? So when there was time for Arabs to conquer Iran, right? A language called Pahlavi, right? Sometimes some pronounce it as H is silent, but pronunciation might be different, right? So Pahlavi, it is usually the language of the sacred books of ancient Iran, right? But by the time when Arabs were conquering Iran, Pahlavi was almost being ruined, like it was almost in its last stages, right? The process of decaying. It no longer had the significance. So instead of that, something else had to come up, right? So a new version of Pahlavi called as New Persian was replacing the old Pahlavi, right? And surprisingly, even though Pahlavi is a native of Persia land, it had so many Arabic vocabulary in it, right? So that is the change between New Persian and Old Pahlavi, right? So, and then after a while, there are so many empires coming up in Khurasan, in Transoxiana. These are all like northwestern frontiers of Indian subcontinent, right? So many sultanates were coming up, so many great kings were emerging. So what they did was they actually took this new Persian called as Pahlavi, like a new version of Pahlavi, to great heights, because it spread throughout the landmass, right? And lastly, the Samanid court poet called Rudaki, right? He died in the year 940, but nonetheless, when he was alive, he contributed so much to the new Persian poetry, right? Like the new Pahlavi poetry, that he's often called as the father of new Persian poetry, right? Because that is how much he contributed. Yeah. So that's again Rudaki, a very, very important scholar who worked in the Samanid court. Samanid is an empire, right? He worked in Samanid court. Okay. So quickly moving on to the next slide. What happens at the beginning of the 11th century, right? Like 11th century is the time when Muhammad of Ghazni became the ruler, right? He started gaining a lot of prominence. He started expanding his territories and boundaries in every way possible. He even tried to conquer India, right? And sometimes he was successful. So when he was doing that in the 11th century, in the beginning of 11th century, he became one of the prominent figures in Persian literary life, because he sponsored, yeah, he patronaged so many scholars to write extensive works in Persian. So that is credit which should be given to Ghazni, right? So obviously poets were attracted. They often used to visit the courts of Ghazni and ask Ghazni for work, right? Because he had so much brilliance, there was so much knowledge within the imperial court itself. So obviously other poets were also attracted, and seeing Ghazni, right, other contemporary rulers as well, they kind of realized that patronizing art is very, very important, because that is the way in which you can actually legitimize your power, right? And also so many works can be written which can be passed down from one generation to another, which again is very helpful. So rulers kind of realized the importance of patronizing art, and therefore they did the same, right? So coming back to Ghazni, so he actually invited a lot of scholars from different parts of the world, and all of them were given shelter within the palace, right? There were so many discussions between Ghazni and poets, so many negotiations, right? And finally he ordered that epic poetry and anthologies to be produced by these group of poets. And yes, they in fact did produce so much work, right? And the most important of them all, or like the most outstanding of them all, was Firdausi, right? Firdausi is the name of a scholar slash poet. He died in the year 1020, but nonetheless, before his death, he worked for almost 30 straight years. That is a lot, guys. Like, working on one particular project or anthology for 30 years is a lot, right? So but this man by name Firdausi, he actually dedicated 30 years to complete a book called Shahnama, right? The spelling is here, it's Shahnama, right? So he this book of Shahnama had 50,000 couplets, basically 50,000 poems, right? Obviously, if anything has 50,000 couplets, it would be referred to as the masterpiece of Islamic literature, right? And that is exactly what happened in this case as well. So it is often referred to as the masterpiece of Islamic literature. It is the book of kings, right? So that's the importance of Shahnama, written by Firdausi. And so I was telling you that at one point of time Ghazni also uh, tried to conquer India, right? There were so many raids started by Ghazni on the Indian subcontinent, and whenever he used to come to the Indian subcontinent, he used to spread some of the Persian culture, right? Persian culture also includes Persian language, and therefore what happened slowly is, within India as well, the Islamic rulers started adopting Persian as one of the important languages for administration and culture, right? So the basic point here is, in India as well, Persian language started growing and gaining importance, right? Cool. So that's Gajni. And also, moving on to the next slide, there's another book by name Kitab al-Fihrist, right? So I would say it's a catalog, and it belonged to a Baghdad person, right? Like a Baghdad person by name Ibn Nadim wrote this catalog called as Kitab al-Fihrist, right? So he died in the year 895, but nonetheless, he produced a huge volume of books when he was alive, and the content of this was basically moral education, right? He also kind of wrote stuff which is very amusing to the readers, like some kind of leisure activity instead of vigorous activity, some kind of leisure work which brings joy to the people was also produced as a part of this catalog, right? So what kind of books did he write? One of them was called as Kalila wa Dimna, right? You will be surprised to know that Kalila va Dimna is nothing but the Pahlavi version of Panchatantra, like the Persian version of Panchatantra, right? All of us know what Panchatantras are. Panchatantra is basically the small stories related to so many animals and all, right? That is exactly translated to Persian. It was renamed as Kalila wa Dimna, right? And these were written as a part of the catalog by Ibn Nadim, right? So that's again fascinating. Indian works going all the way to the land of Arabia, right? And not just story writing and all, the history writing also gained importance in the Muslim societies, right? The tradition of putting down history, putting down oral traditions, that was also important. And eventually whatever histories were written, they were read by so many scholars, and at one point of time these were distributed to every student in school, right, to learn about the history. They're like, read the books, therefore you will know what is our history, right? So students actually read all these books, and by reading history what we will get, right? Firstly, we will get to know about our ancient predecessors or our ancestors achievements, right? What work did they do, what kind of life did they live, right? So all these kinds of information. Alongside that, you can also borrow like certain kinds of administration which they used and implement them in present day, right? So learning from the past. So it had, like, learning history or like studying history had a two-way benefit. The first one is knowing about our ancestors, the second is learning from the past, right? So I'm hoping these points are clear till now. Any questions, guys? Any questions, please put them down in the chat box. Okay, I do not see any questions. I'll continue then. Cool. We're done with this slide. Then we'll move on to the next. So by 10th century, what was happening is the Islamic world in itself has emerged as an important world, right? It started gaining prominence. People started acknowledging that there is some kind of Islamic world that exists, which is important. right? And whatever religious buildings were there within the Islamic land, they gained a lot of importance, right? They were seen as some kind of symbols, some kind of prestige symbols, right? Let's say I'm an outsider and I am looking at the architecture that was done in the Islamic world, and I'll be like, wow, that's amazing, right? Because there are spectacular architectural works, and therefore through the architecture the Islamic empire in itself is gaining importance. So they are closely linked, right? And usually whatever mosques or shrines or tombs, all these construction activities, all these material monuments, whatever were being built, the designs were borrowed from Spain and Central Asia, right? For example, the arches or the domes or minarets, right? Like domes, you all know, right? Like semicircular structures on the top of the building. Minarets are these pillars. Arches also, you all know. So like all these features of the architectural style, they were borrowed from the Spain and Central Asian lands, right? Alongside that, there is also an open courtyard which was present in all of these buildings, right? So these are all borrowed from Spain and Central Asia. And also, like in the first Islamic century, which is the 7th century, right? In the initial days of when the Islam was established, the mosque acquired a distinctive architectural form, right? Initially it was that, but later on it changed its form. Then the dome structure came up, then the minarets came up and all, right? So that's the architectural style followed for constructing mosques. And then every mosque had an open courtyard. Yeah, this open courtyard was called as sahn, right? An important term again, please remember, open courtyard is sahn. And like there's a mosque, then there's a courtyard. It was not empty, but courtyard always had some kind of water fountain or some kind of water body, for example pond, right? It was placed in the courtyard because usually Muslims have this thing that while they are going inside a mosque, they are supposed to clean themselves up, like wash their hands, wash their face, wash their feet, right? So that is why this water was used to cleanse themselves up and then enter the mosque, right? And as you enter, there's a big hall where usually people sit and pray. And then there's a pedestal sort of thing where the imam or the religious leader used to stand and deliver his teachings, right? So the order is the main gateway, then there's courtyard, then there's the big hall, and then there's the pedestal on which the imam stands, right? That's the order. Okay, so construction of the buildings, right? Like this was not just seen as a part of what do you say, mosques, right? Not just religious institutions, but like general buildings like hospitals or palaces or caravanserais. So all these are different types of buildings, right? Even in these buildings the structure is followed, this linear pattern, right? Like gateway, courtyard, hall, and then the main house or whatever, right? So this kind of construction was seen as a part of every building in the Islamic world, right? And usually the fact that all these were deserts, right? Like the whole of the Islamic land in some sense is a deserted region, right? So people used to travel from one place to another for trade and other purposes. So whenever they're traveling, there were some kinds of caravanserais in between the travel routes, so that if it's night, people can rest and they can resume their journey the next day. Yeah, so there were these kind of places in the middle of the routes. Even they were built in the same style, right? Like usually these desert places, palaces were built by Umayyads, right? For example, there's one in Palestine, there's one in Jordan. Yeah, these are usually very, very luxurious, right? And even like when kings used to go on hunting or other some kinds of recreational activities, they used to stay in these palaces, right? So whatever the situation is, whatever the use of it is, at the end of the day, the architectural style was the same as that of the mosque, right? So that is the point. And all of these palaces, right, like they were modeled on Roman and Sasanian architecture. Yeah, I was telling you, right, like Spain architecture, which also includes Roman and Sasanian architecture. They were like very lavishly decorated. Yeah, like wall paintings, sculptures, like all these big, big chandeliers, like like huge paintings of people, right? These are decorative items. So all of these were abundantly used within these palaces, right? And the Abbasids actually built a new imperial city in Samarra, yeah, and amidst gardens and running water. Again, in a new city that was built by Abbasids called as Samarra, there also gardens slash courtyard with the elements of water like fountain and all. These were still crucial elements even in the new cities that were coming up, right? And lastly, even though like these cities that we are discussing right now, for example, the palaces within the cities, right? If you go to Baghdad right now, you won't see the palaces in which Abbasids has once upon a time lived, right? You won't see them because they have been destroyed. They are in ruins right now. In the same way, Fatimids lived in Cairo. Their palaces were in Cairo. We don't have palaces in Cairo as well right now. All of them are disappeared. They are destroyed. But the information we know about them is only through literary texts, right? Because people have written about them very, very extensively. Yeah. Um, and moving on to the next slide, this is again very important. The way in which the the way in which the Islamic writings were written, number one, and also how they were portrayed, number two, right? So before delving deep, one thing which we need to remember is, as a part of the Islamic traditions, representing some kind of human or like human face or human form, right? This is not acceptable in the Islamic religion, right? Not just human, but any kind of living beings, be it animals, be it birds, anything representing any kind of living form in the art of the Islamic architecture is not acceptable, right? Then what is art? If not living beings, if not humans, then what constituted art? Right? So now we have two answers for it. Number one, the first element is calligraphy, right? It's called as kattati in Persian, or as we all know, calligraphy is the art of beautiful handwriting, right? It has its own specific style. That is number one. And number two is arabesque, right? So arabesque is again all these geometrical and vegetal designs. Yeah, geometric shapes, right? Like geometric shapes and designs. You all know, like you've studied in mathematics. So these were some of the designs which were used to represent Islamic religious art instead of the actual human and living faces, right? So that's representing of art. And alongside these calligraphy and arabesque, sometimes inscriptions were written on the walls of the buildings, right? Be it small inscriptions, be it big inscriptions, they had all these religious quotations borrowed from Quran or Hadith or any other legitimate literary source of the religion, right? They were also used to kind of decorate the walls or like the buildings, right? Calligraphy art has been best preserved in manuscripts of the Quran, right? Especially dating from 8th and 9th centuries, right? And then there are literary works such as the Kitab al-Aghani, yeah, Kaila wa Dimma, Maqamat of Hariri, All these are names which you do not have to remember, just telling you for your reference, right? So these kind of literary works were illustrated with miniature paintings. So what are miniature paintings? So let's say, I don't know, like let's say this pen, right? So this pen is usually like this long, but in the miniature paintings, it will only be very small, right? Like its size is shrinked. Miniature in literal terms is small, right? So whatever the object is, they are shrinked in their size, and then they are representing very small, like very short, in smaller size, right? And they are called as miniature paintings. So miniature paintings were also famous back in the Islamic land. And then a wide variety of illumination techniques which will kind of give a elegant angle to the paintings were also introduced, so that the book can be aesthetically pleasing, right, to give that eye pleasing look, right? And then there are plant designs, there are floral designs, there are like how just a garden looks like. So those ideas were also borrowed, and then they were implemented in all these books and buildings to give them a elegant look, right? So that's the point of the Islamic art and architecture and also its prominence, right? So that brings us to the end of the topics for today's, not just today's, but like the whole of the chapter, right? So now we'll quickly have 2 slides remaining where we'll talk about the conclusion, right? We'll wind up this chapter like a quick recap, right? So generally, if you talk about the Islamic lands or Islamic civilization, which started in the 7th till almost the 15th century, like the medieval period, we have looked at 3 topics mainly, right? Throughout the chapter, throughout the 8 classes we studied, we have looked at 3 topics. The first one is religion, right? The second is Islamic community, the people in general, right? And the third is Islamic politics. Yeah. So in the conclusion, we'll talk about how there's an interrelationship between religion, community and politics, and sometimes how they were different from each other, right? So we often in the 7th century, we've often seen that religion, community and politics were intertwined, right? They were merged because, like what exactly is the intermixing of these 3 elements? Various examples, right? Like for example, politics, or the way a king is supposed to rule, his administrative strategies and all, they are derived from Sharia, which is a religious book, right? So now what do we see here? A link between politics and religion, right? Even the community, or like the people in general, they led their life, the way of life was designed on the Sharia terms. Again, a distinction, a relation between community and religion, right? So this is what I mean by the relationship between the elements. So that kind of merging was there in the 7th century, right? But as the centuries progressed, in the next 5 centuries, we see that these 3 circles are separated. Yeah, religion was separated from politics. Kings had their own style of administration. They did not follow Sharia. We've seen those examples, right? So in the 5 centuries later on, these circles became separate, right? But again, after the 5 centuries, almost around like 14th, 15th centuries, they started coming together again, right? We especially see that the influence of Islam over state and government, even though it was minimal, right? Politics involved the sanctioning of religion. Let's say the kingship or civil wars, right? Like we've seen in the Mughal times how they were not abiding by the Sharia laws, and therefore they are against the Sharia law, right? Now again we see a distinction between the religion and the rulers, right? And sometimes the circles of religion and community overlapped. Yeah. So whatever like Muslim community was leading their way of life, sometimes they abided by the Sharia rituals, sometimes they did not, some communities did, some communities did not, right? It was no more governing itself, but it was defining its religious identity, right? And the only way that the religion and community could be separated in any Islamic tradition is by secularizing the Muslim society, right? Because once the society believes that, like religion will not decide our way of life, we have that agency to decide our own way of life, right? Once that secularizing aspect comes in the minds of people, then they will detach themselves from the religion, right? Unless that secularity comes, there won't be any detachment, right? And in order for this to happen, in order for the community and religion to be separated, Sufis came in. They advocated that civil society, basically community in general, it should be made autonomous. Like all these rituals should be replaced by private spirituality. Like one should believe in themselves rather than God. So that is what the philosophers and Sufis advocated. Okay, so that is basically the conclusion. Finally, we've come to the end of this chapter. We've almost had like 8 tiring sessions. I get it, this chapter is kind of difficult, but it's important nonetheless. So, but anyways, we've come to the end. Any questions, guys, please feel free to ask. I know it's a lot to take in. There was so much of content being dumped onto you, but it is what it is. Okay, Jyoti is here with us. Hi, Jyoti. I'm doing very well, Jyoti. Thanks for asking. I'm hoping you're doing well too, right? Okay, somebody else is here with the name Pati Parmeshwar, but cool. Hello, hello. So, any questions, guys? So, that officially brings us to the end of the chapter, right? We're finally done. We can have a quiz today evening at 6 p.m., right? Please tune in. I know most of y'all have been waiting for this quiz. It's today at 6 p.m., so we'll have a quiz, right? Cool then. Just type down in the chat box if y'all have any questions. In the meanwhile, I'll try to end the session, right? So regarding the Iconic and Plus subscriptions I've talked about in the beginning, there's a Dashra offer going on right now. It's valid till 18th of October, which is Monday, right? So if you use my code, which is TUM10, you'll obviously get a 10% off straight away. But if you do the subscription in the month of October, like before Dashra ends, you will be getting an extra 10% off, right? So it's a limited offer. Grab yours before it ends. And yes, so if you like the content of these videos, please do like it, share it as much as possible, comment down below with any questions or concerns you might have. Along with that, also subscribe to the channel Unacademy and Scholars in particular, right? Thank you, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. I know it's a morning class, but nonetheless, thank you so much for coming. Cool. Tushar just joined us. Hello, Tushar. I'm good. I'm hoping you're doing well too. That's okay, Tushar. The class just got over. It was supposed to start at 11 and it's supposed to end at 12. Our usual timings are 6 in the evening, but because I couldn't take classes on Tuesday, I took a class now, right? So from next time, we'll only be having classes at 6 in the evening, right? Cool then. Any questions, please stay back and ask. If not, you are free to leave, guys. The session is officially over. But again, I'll see you guys at 6 p.m. today, right, in the evening for the quiz. Just pass on the word, inform your friends and ask them to come join the quiz if they would like to. Right? It's going to be a quiz on the 4th chapter, the Central Islamic Lands. Right? Cool then. I'll just stay back for a couple of seconds in case anybody has questions. But if not, you're free to leave, guys. Thank you. Bye, Namit. You take care as well. Bye bye. Okay, I do not see any questions. I'm taking it as every concept is clear because I'm stressing on this so much because we do not have a revision class after this. We directly have a quiz, right? So please show up at the quiz. I'll see you guys then at 6 p.m. Thank you. Have a good day, guys. Thank you so much.